Okay, boys and girls, are you ready to go again? We're up to chapter 3 now, which is called Edmund and the Wardrobe. This is from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and the series Chronicles of Narnia. So Lucy has just come back from Narnia. She went by herself. Mr. Tumnus repented of his intention to do her harm and led her back to the wardrobe. She ran through the wardrobe, feeling her way, and comes jumping out of the other side, saying, "Hey, I'm back, I'm okay. I hope you weren't worried about me." And let's begin. Lucy ran out of the empty room into the passage and found the other three. "It's all right," she repeated. "I've come back." "What on earth are you talking about, Lucy?" asked Susan. "Why," said Lucy in amazement, "haven't you all been wondering where I was?" "So you've been hiding, have you?" said Peter. Poor old Lou, hiding and no one noticed. You'll have to hide longer than that if you want people to start looking for you. "But I've been away for hours and hours," said Lucy. All the others stared at one another. "Batty," said Edmund, tapping his head, "quite batty." "What do you mean, Lou?" said Peter. "What I said," answered Lucy. "It was just after breakfast when I went into the wardrobe. I've been away for hours and hours, and had tea, and all sorts of things have happened." "Don't be silly," said Lucy. "Don't be silly, Lucy," said Susan. "We've only just come out of that room a moment ago, and you were in there then." "She's not being silly at all," said Peter. "She's just making up a story for fun, aren't you?" "And why shouldn't she?" "No, Peter, I'm not," she said. It's a magic wardrobe. There's wood inside it, and it's snowing, and there's a fawn and a witch, and it's called Narnia. Come and see." The others did not know what to think, but Lucy was so excited that they all went back with her into the room. She rushed ahead of them, flung open the door of the wardrobe, and cried, "Now, go in and see for yourselves." "Why, you goose," said Susan, putting her head inside and pulling the furs apart. "It's just an ordinary wardrobe. Look, there's the back of it." Then everyone looked in and pulled the coats apart, and they saw, Lucy herself saw, a perfectly ordinary wardrobe. There was no wood, no snow, only the back of the wardrobe, with hooks on it. And Peter went in and rapped his knuckles on it to make sure it was solid. "A jolly good hoax, Lou," he said as he came out again. "You've really taken us in. I admit, we half believed you." "It wasn't a hoax at all," said Lucy. "Really, truly. It was a different moment. It was all different a moment ago. Honest it was. I promise." "Come in, Lou," said Peter. "That's going a bit too far. You had your joke. Hadn't you better drop it now?" Lucy grew very red in the face and tried to say something, although she hardly knew what she was trying to say, and burst into tears. For the next few days she was very miserable. She could have made it up with the others quite easily at any moment if she could have brought herself to say that the whole thing was only a story made up for fun. But Lucy was a very truthful girl, and she knew that she was really in the right, and she could not bring herself to say this. The others, who thought that she was telling a lie, and a silly lie too, made her very unhappy. The two other ones did this without meaning to, but Edmund could be spiteful, and on this occasion he was spiteful. He sneered and jeered at Lucy and kept on asking if she had found in the other countries and the other cupboards all over the house. What made it worse was that these days... Hey, you want to come here and say hi? Come here. Come here. Come on. This is my little buddy, the husky. Right? Yeah, he came out to say hi. The weather was fine, and they were out of doors from morning to night, bathing, fishing, climbing trees, and lying in the heather. But Lucy could not properly enjoy any of it, and so things went on until the next wet day. That day, when it came to the afternoon and there was still no sign of a break in the weather, they decided to play hide and seek, and Susan was it. And as soon as the others scattered to hide, Lucy went into the room where the wardrobe was. She did not mean to hide in the wardrobe because she knew that that would only set the others talking about it again. The whole wretched business. She did not want to have one more look inside it, for by this time she was beginning to wonder herself whether Narnia and the Faun had not been a dream. The house was so large and complicated and so full of hiding places that she thought she could have time to have one look into the wardrobe and then hide somewhere else. But as soon as she reached it, she heard steps in the passage outside, and then there was nothing for it but to jump into the wardrobe and hold the door closed behind her. She did not shut it properly because she knew it was very silly to shut oneself into a wardrobe, even if it's not a magic one. Now the steps she had heard were those of Edmund. He came into the room just in time to see Lucy vanishing into the wardrobe. He at once decided to get into it himself, not because he thought it was a particularly good place to hide, because he wanted to go on teasing her about her imaginary country. He opened the door. There were the usual coats hanging up as usual, and a smell of mothballs, and darkness and silence, and no sign of Lucy. "She thinks I'm Susan come to catch her," said Edmund to himself, "and so she's keeping very quiet in the back." He jumped in and shut the door, forgetting what a very foolish thing this is to do. Then he began feeling about for Lucy in the dark. He had expected to find her in a few seconds, and was very surprised when he did not. He decided to open the door again and let in some light, but he could not find the door either. He didn't like this at all and began groping wildly in every direction. He even shouted out, "Lucy! Lou, where are you? I know you're in here." There was no answer, and Edmund noticed that his own voice had a curious sound. Not the sound you'd expect in a cupboard, but a kind of open-air sound. He also noticed that he was unexpectedly cold. Then he saw a light. "Thank goodness," said Edmund. The door must have swung open again of its own accord. He forgot all about Lucy and went towards the light, which he thought was the open door of the wardrobe. But instead of finding himself stepping out into the spare room, he found himself stepping out from the shadow of some thick, dark fir trees into an open place in the middle of the wood. There was a crisp, dry snow under his feet, and more snow lying on the branches of the trees. Overhead there was a pale blue sky, and the sort of sky one sees on a fine winter day in the morning. Straight ahead of him he saw between the tree trunks the sun, just rising, very red and clear. Everything was perfectly still, as if he were the only living creature in that country. There was not even a robin or a squirrel among the trees, and the wood stretched as far as he could see in every direction. He shivered. He now remembered that he had been looking for Lucy, and also how unpleasant he had been to her, and about the imaginary country, which now turned out not to have been imaginary at all. He thought that she must be somewhere quite close, and so he shouted, "Lucy! Lucy! I'm here, Edmund." There was no answer. "She's angry about all the things I've been saying lately," thought Edmund, and though he did not like to admit it, that he had been wrong, he did not much like being alone in this strange, cold place. So he shouted again, "I say, Lou, I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I see now that you were right all along. Do come out. Make it pox." Still there was no answer. "Just like a girl," said Edmund to himself, "sulking somewhere, and won't accept an apology." He looked around him again and decided he did not much like this place, and had almost made up his mind to go home when he heard very far off in the wood a sound of bells. He listened, and the sound came nearer and nearer, and at last there swept into sight a sledge drawn by 2 reindeer. The reindeer were about the size of Shetland ponies, and their hair was so white that even the snow hardly looked white compared with them. Their branching horns were gilded and shone like something on fire when the sun caught them. Their harness was of scarlet leather and covered with bells. On the sledge, driving the reindeer, was a fat dwarf, who would have been about 3 feet high if he'd been standing. He was dressed in a polar bear's fur, and on his head he wore a red hood with a long gold tassel hanging down from its point. His huge beard covered his knees and served him instead of a rug. But behind him, on the much higher seat in the middle of the sledge, sat a very different person. a great lady, taller than any woman that Edmund had ever seen. She was also covered in white fur up to her throat, and held a long, straight, golden wand in her right hand, and wore a golden crown on her head. Her face was white, not merely pale, but white like snow or paper, or icing, or sugar, except for her very red mouth. It was a beautiful face in other respects, but proud and cold and stern. The sledge was a fine sight as it came sweeping towards Edmund, with the bells jingling and the dwarf cracking his whip and the snow flying up on each side of it. "Stop!" cried the lady, and the dwarf pulled the reindeer up so sharp they almost sat down. And then they recovered themselves and champing their bits and blowing. In the frosty air, the breath coming out of their nostrils looked like smoke. "And what, pray, are you?" said the lady, looking down at Edmund, looking at him hard. Well, my name is Edmund," said Edmund rather awkwardly. He did not like the way she looked at him. The lady frowned. "Is that how you address a queen?" She asked, looking sterner than ever. "I beg your pardon, your majesty, I didn't know," said Edmund. "Not know that the Queen of Narnia?" cried she. "Ha! You shall know us better hereafter. But I repeat, what are you?" "Please, your majesty," said Edmund, "I don't know what you mean. I'm at school. At least I was. It's the holidays now." And that is chapter 3. Edmund just made the acquaintance of the White Witch. And in chapter 4, she gives him some Turkish delight, which is kind of enchanted. So we shall continue next time. Take care. Bye.